Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me echo my colleagues in wishing you a happy birthday as well. Mr. Borowski, thank you very much for your testimony. I share the opinion of many of the members of the committee that you should, in fact, be independent, and that if there are challenges with Treasury, we should certainly be addressing those because we value your independence and we certainly value the information that you've provided us here today. I too, like many of my colleagues, am astonished by the potential exposure that you have identified. And I guess I take a little different view. And I go back to how this may have been prevented and am astonished that so few people are willing to look at the inaction and the failure of regulation to work properly to prevent the almost collapse of our financial markets. I at the time was not serving in Congress last fall when the markets nearly collapsed, but I said at the time that I would have reluctantly supported the TARP if only to stabilize the financial institutions. I subsequently voted against the second tranche of the TARP because it didn't include many of the conditions on transparency that so many of my colleagues have talked about here today. But I go back, and I go back to the failure of Congress, the failure of previous administrations to regulate mortgage-backed securities, to regulate CDOs, to regulate CLOs, and while at the same time the banking industry was suggesting that they are the most regulated industry in the country and there wasn't any need for us to move forward. And many of these same folks that are complaining about the exposure are also working against regulatory reform in financial services. So I'm struck by some of the comments that have been made by some of my colleagues. But specifically, I'd like to pursue a line of questioning regarding some of these toxic assets and the valuation of the toxic assets. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday that I think was very interesting when they talked about collateralized debt obligation and the fact that, this was related to the mortgage-backed securities, which of course allowed the predatory lending to happen. But trying to pull all of these assets apart and value them in any real way is a Herculean task because there is so little that is actually, in terms of collateral, in terms of capital, that's actually behind them. How do you, from your perspective, when looking at these toxic assets, how do you believe we can best value them?
I think that I too read the Wall Street Journal article and the pulling apart of one of these CDOs squared, and I think it was a great illustration of the problem of these unbelievably complex securities and the challenge that Congress has in creating the right type of regulatory reform that will ensure oversight so that these types of transactions, these types of products don't wreak the damage that they did. I think the valuation issue is a very challenging one, and I think it's one that at first instance has got to be done by the Treasury itself to the extent that they have these assets on their books, whether it's through an asset guarantee of Citigroup, whether it's in its own collection of assets. It's a very complicated structure that needs a great degree of expertise and I think a great degree of skepticism. We'll also have to see what happens with the other programs whether these complex derivative products start coming across and being in the actual purchase programs or other subsequent TARP programs, where I think that issue will come even more to the front.
I realize your function is in evaluating the way in which the TARP monies are being spent. But as you look at it and as you look at the causes of this financial collapse, can you offer advice as to moving forward, the type of regulation and the type of products that we should be looking to regulate as we move forward?
I think that one is a little bit outside of my lane. I think I would be uncomfortable offering opinion on that because I think it's when it gets to the core issues of regulatory reform, I think it's fair for us to identify some areas like the role of credit rating agencies because we're seeing that. But I think when you get into the nuts and bolts of regulatory reform, I would be uncomfortable offering my opinion.
Is it fair to say that much of the exposure that you have identified is due to a failure to regulate appropriately certain products?
I don't think that short of an audit product or short of a more thorough examination of these causes, I would feel comfortable offering that opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right. Thank you very much.